my research partner and I, we're trying to help path the future by looking at the past, and we're trying to bridge between science and spirituality. This chip that we just made exists an infinite number of times. Therefore, when we turn it on, we're opening a gateway to all the other times and all the other timelines that it's turned on, and these chips are working together across infinite universes to solve that problem together. They're saying this is gonna happen, and in 10,000 years, there's gonna be, in the book, they call it the elect one, or the anointed one, or this, it's a figure, it's a messianic figure that's gonna come in 10,000 years. And we started our calendars because a person showed up named Jesus Christ. You've got sites in Egypt that look like sites in Bolivia, and you've got sites in Bolivia that look like sites in Central America, and you've got sites there that mimic sites in Cambodia. And it's just kind of like this big connective thing that anyone from the mainline of history would not have been making the connections. And it was just as simple as like looking at the things that were there and saying, yeah, that it's kind of weird that all over the world everybody started building stuff out of stone, and it was huge.
I would like to say hello, Greg, and thank you for doing this. I'm looking for this episode since a long time. As we discovered in the few minutes that we talked before this recording, we are both watching or watched Rogan. So one of the things that killed and destroyed all my brains was the work that Graham Hancock put, and it was hard for me to accept at the beginning, but now it's getting more and more interesting to dig into the details of what happened in the past. So first of all, hi. Nice meeting you.
Nice to talk with you today, Paul.
Yes. Thanks, Greg.
So Graham Hancock, he's the one that got you.
He's the one that...
He's been doing this for a long time, and he's just recently become, I'd say, like I said, like a bulldozer. He's paving the way for people to have this discussion now. And when I first got interested in it, it was, I think, way before the Rogan days. I think it was before Rogan had a podcast. And I had seen a talk, literally my first time thinking about this was seeing a talk of Graham Hancock's, and he's giving a lecture to maybe like 20 people, and he's nervous, and he's hoping people will understand what he's trying to say. And what he was trying to say was that there's some fingerprints, in a sense, like there's evidence of this bigger global educational movement. And he was saying, you've got sites in Egypt that look like sites in Bolivia, and you've got sites in Bolivia that look like sites in Central America, and you've got sites there that mimic sites in Cambodia. And it's just kind of like this big connective thing that anyone from the mainline of history would not have been making the connections. And it was just as simple as like looking at the things that were there and saying, yeah, that it's kind of weird that all over the world everybody started building stuff out of stone, and it was huge. And that if you've got big stone structures, like imagine what they could do with wood, imagine what they could do, like what sort of population center you need to do that. And so he was really influential, I think, in getting my eyes to open up. And then there's other researchers who contributed too, like the work of like Michael Cremo, Forbidden Archaeology, where I think Cremo, he's one heck of a prolific writer. And he has, it's like looking at his work as sort of, it's interesting because with any of these guys, you just kind of know, like they don't have 25 undergrads validating everything they're writing, but the things that they do find that are anomalous, they have to stand out. And one of the things that Cremo brought to the table was there were the Olmec civilization, and he was using data he didn't have to go get it. He was using data that was already on the record, that was radiometrically dating the Olmecs in some anomalous dates back like to 10,000 BC, and he was so his whole assumption, Cremo's assumption, is that humans like us has been around for like 8 million years. I don't personally see the rest of that evidence, but that idea got him to start looking, to if we've been around for 8 million years, like what else can we find? It opened him up to, sort of claiming that some of these places are very old, Like I don't think Crema would place the pyramids at 4,000 BC. I don't think he'd place them at 10. I think he's more like into the 40,000. Like he sees that humanity's been around for a while. I don't really share like the super long theory, but I do think we've been around for a very long time. And when you look at our story, it's like, well, did we? If we believe radiometric dating, which I tend to think it's strong, it's a strong out a way to date, then humans in our modern form have been around for like 300,000 years, and that's just the oldest one we found. And it's not like we have a preponderance of skeletons. It's not like we have a preponderance of any of this stuff, but you have to imagine, like, what are the conditions that happen that would take a human today and preserve them for 300,000 years? That's not going to happen in cemeteries. That's not going to happen in tombs. They're going to be gone. Like, it's only going to happen in rigid cave structures and stuff that has to be like somewhat like if an animal said, hey, there's a human skeleton, it's probably gone. So there's not much, that you're going to find. We don't find millions of dog skeletons or anything yet. The population of dogs is in the hundreds of millions, and like so when you open the mind up, you got to kind of look at it and say, well, if we've been around for this long, what is different? Because we're kind of on the same line from 300,000 years ago. What's different from then until today? And what are the events that we went through that got us from those early days to today? And the book that we worked on, the Book of Enoch, like that's a moment of understanding where some of the linearity of our civilization would have been broken, because it kind of speaks to like an account coming before a great flood. It speaks to this Noahic flood. It's in that mythology. It's in that religion's mythology. Um, but there's a part in Enoch where it says, hey, there's going to be a flood, and then there's going to be about 10,000 years, and then things are going to change. So what that does is it says, well, if we're thinking in these longer terms, then of course we're not thinking the flood occurred on the Anno Mundi dates, on these like manufactured dates from scholars that they say, well, if you add up all the numbers in the Bible, it gets you to the 4,500 BC or something. It's like, no, now we've got to find 10,000 years before this to land where this flood could have taken place. And what's wild about that discovery is you go, what does Graham Hancock say? And what did Randall Carlson say? They say pretty strongly, there was this big global cataclysm at about 10,000 BC. And what's really interesting about this is that they're not just saying that. Like, that's backed up by climate data from the US government, from the European organizations. Globally, we accept that the climate at around 10,000 BC was a disaster. Like, it was the beginning of a warming trend that hasn't stopped. And we have paleoclimate models that would show you the world was covered with ice down to like Germany, yeah, where you are, yeah, probably ice. Where I am, probably not ice, but where I am, we would have had 50 more miles of coast. We would have had to like from if you were on the beach today, 50 miles east would still be land back then. So you can imagine like the devastation happening, and you can imagine things disappearing. And then we have a story that seems to have survived it, and it's just a piece of a story. But what really bought me in and made me say with my research partner, we have to write this thing, is because of this 10,000 year thing, because it's just so weird that they're saying this is gonna happen, and in 10,000 years there's gonna be in the book they call it the elect one or the anointed one, or this. It's a figure. It's a messianic figure that's going to come in 10,000 years. So if we do 10,000 BC for the date of the flood, 0 would be the date that this person would show up, and we started our calendars because a person showed up named Jesus Christ. And and this guy, this figure that's in this Book of Enoch is this guy. It's right down to the like he's going to show up, and he's going to deal with this problem of the guilt, forgive the sins. He's going to try to unify things.
First, I want to come back to a bit to the work of Graham Hancock, because I think the amount of I would not call it hate, but in today's term would be hate that he got
It
from
is
the
right,
from
Mark.
the all the scientific community back then when he started expressing his theory outside, and everyone made fun of him and said this is crazy, and he was called names. And you said that you have seen one of his speeches where he was speaking in front of less amount of people. Did you knew about him, or you just find out about him and about this theory at that moment when you saw him speaking?
Mm. Well, it was digital, so I'm trying to think of the
Mm-hmm.
year. I've always been interested in alternative theories for things because when I was younger, I remember hearing this story about Troy and um, was just fascinated about the idea of like an impenetrable city, and to find out that they never found Troy I think when I was younger, that was what like the rumor going around was it's a myth,
Mm-hmm.
and then to find out that they found it, and so it's one of these things where I thought archaeology could be interesting through that, and so that plus being interested in the Great Pyramids because who isn't? They're crazy. Got me into this mindset of like finding him, right? And so
Yeah.
when I did, it kind of just it was a moment in my life where I was actively looking for things like that, where I was looking to see like does anybody out there have anything that isn't ancient aliens? I don't need that story. Like whatever
Mm-hmm.
that story is going on there, that they're very bought into it. They're very single tracked with ancient aliens. And I don't think that their research is like at the highest level. It's clearly an entertainment product. But yeah, Graham just changed that. I think he combined those two things together. He combined like good research and entertainment into a format to get the message across. But I think the thing that stood out to me the most was that he was speaking about Egypt probably being older. And
Mm-hmm.
independently, I had done some. I don't know. There's this problem with the Great Pyramids. They're humongous. They obviously took a long time to build, a lot of effort, very good design, from people that likely had very good, math. But the Great Pyramid is off from being perfectly aligned north by like 0.05 degrees, and that's a mystery in a sense because like why would you get this wrong? So I was looking for people that going out there like reading as much as I could and trying to see all the different theories because I had a theory with that was essentially like, well, it's off today. Has the
Mm-hmm.
north ever changed? And when you say yeah, it has, well, when you figure out the computation for like how much it's changed and where and how long that takes to change, it takes a long time. So it gives you a date on the pyramids that goes back to like 18,000 BC or
Mm-hmm.
something to get a good alignment. And then that would repeat, but it would be like 50,000 BC for the next alignment. So it kind of like opened my mind up to say, well, maybe there's alternative ways to look at things, but and fruit, areas that you need to go explore. And I think one of the reasons that Graham gets a lot of hate is because these guys, I say these guys, I don't have any, I don't think they're a group, but I think people that,
They
I
are
think people,
at least not an organized group.
you're right. Well, I think they sort of are under one tenet though, that like, so from my perspective, I'm an independent researcher and I'm learning as much as I can. And I'm only learning as much as I can because I'm interested in seeing like what's missing in a sense. I'm like I'm really like thinking there's missing stuff here. We've got to put this together better, the story together better. And I'm seeing so many problems with what's in textbooks, and I'm an amateur, man. I'm seeing like problems in the dating. I'm seeing assumptions that are being made not based on multiple points of evidence, but based on floppy accounts like that are old, and then this is ending up in a textbook as the way it happened. I was reading so that there's this great pyramid built by a guy named Khufu. That's the guess because there's really nothing indicating Khufu built this pyramid other than a
Mm-hmm.
single cartouche. And there's a secondary source, and this is wild. Herodotus. So Herodotus is writing like 300 BC, and he goes to Egypt and he gets a story out of an Egyptian priest, or a bunch, and then lays out some details that are making it into history books today, like that the pyramids took 20 years to build because that's what he wrote down. He also wrote down that the Egyptians had been around for like 24,000 years, and so that gets thrown away, and then this other thing shows up and they're like, yeah, that's it. 20 years to build the pyramid. That makes sense. Let's put that. And that's in all the history books. Um, and you've got missing books from this guy named Manetho, who was an Egyptian priest. He wrote a book for, um, I think it was one. It was a king. A king had commissioned him to write a book, and the book's lost now. But we have there were scholars throughout history that had read the book and then had commentary on it. I think they went out and destroyed it afterwards, but like they had commentary on this old book because it had the same issues, and it also identifies a pharaoh in the same kind of order that apparently built the pyramid, but he doesn't have the name Khufu or Cheops or anything. He's got this other name, and it also says Egypt is very old, to the length of at least 20, 30,000 years old.
Mhm.
So I don't know why it is that they take some things and say, yes, that's totally true. And then they take other things and say, well, if that's true, that's a problem. And I think that's what it boils down to, is that, like, me and my research partner, we go through stuff from Egypt all the time, and we can see, I think it's pretty good, decent evidence that um, for the length of time that Egypt was supposed to be dynastic, which is supposed to be around 3,000 years, they maintained writing, they maintained art styles, like they went through bad periods and good periods, but whatever was going on in the old kingdom was on a different level, and it was, they were creating things that were well beyond their access to tools. Like we just found something that was a 5,000 pound or something. I'm looking at my partner. 5,000 pounds,
2,700 kilograms.
2,700 kilograms, and this thing was made out of pink granite, and it was carved down quite beautifully at some point. It's the size of, a car. And it was done at a time that was something like, according to the historians, 1,500 years before the Iron Age. And that what's wild about that is that this type of granite on the Mohs scale is like a 7 or an 8. That's how hard it is. And they're trying to say they did it with copper tools, and you're like, well, copper's like a 3. I don't think it would even scratch it. So it's and there's like precision cuts, and not only that, you look at this thing and you're like, there is no way that's 3,000 years. Like, this is a pink granite box that's basically eroded and pitted all over the place, and that's just something that didn't survive very well. We find other statues from back then that you look at them and you go, like, this is just as good, if not better, than the greatest sculptors coming out of Rome, um working the marble, like Bernini. Like these things where we look at them today, wow, look at what they made in the 1500s,
Mhm.
and it's like, yeah, no, look at what they made in ancient Egypt, where the population was less than 1 million, and they dedicated artistic resources like this to carving out a diorite cube that's 25 feet tall,
And
and
most probably again in like 20 days or something. Like
yeah,
the pyramid in 20 years is the same. Like most
yeah,
probably.
it's just the weirdest story. And I think that the hatred you get is, or we see, I think, I don't know perfectly, because I don't think someone who's in the spot of having to defend their profession is always going to be of a rational mind,
That's the
right?
problem. That's the
But
problem. If you put years of study, sorry for interrupting you, Greg, but if you put years of studying in some things that you thought, okay, this is going to be the base for everything what I will do in the future, and maybe you did out of passion, maybe you haven't done it out of passion, maybe you have done it because you had to do it, and then you think, okay, should I change it? No, I don't want to. I know the base. I
yeah,
can go
it's
on
very
with the
hard.
same. I can go with the same lyric, and I can go with the same theory. No, these guys, no, they don't know what they are saying. These are the proof.
Yeah, I can feel it a bit. I work in software, and I think, I was there from the beginning of the internet, building stuff on the internet, and the number of different languages and paradigms I had to, and it's still happening, man. It's like, man, I got to learn some new JavaScript thing, and so I'm fluent in several computing languages, but never at one point did I think I'm learning this one, and then I'll just have to learn a new one in a couple of years. Every time I learn a new language, I'm thinking this is going to be the one, and so I can load up all my trivia and how I do things, and I have to change it every couple of years. And I think for someone that was in something that feels like a static field, like something where, like, it's a lot of trivia, that's how they test to see if you're a good archaeologist or a good whatever. It's a lot of trivia. and that trivia could change, quite dramatically. And I think we see evidence that it in fact does change. But to think that that's what's delaying everything, it could be the biggest opportunity for folks to reimagine the space. But it seems like they want to just cling to something. And when I see Egypt, I say if we're being open, we need to really stop putting dates on stuff, because we need to just focus on linearity. Like, did this come before this? Because I think it's completely possible that the Egyptian culture is one of a few cultures that either was so quickly seeded after a global cataclysm, and we've misjudged that in a sense, like that we think the foundation date of Egypt, the nation, was done by a guy named Menes, or Narmer, a pharaoh. And they placed that date to somewhere. I mean, I could have Foresi if you want to look it up, but it's roughly 3000 BC. So there's nothing saying that. They didn't, have a temple somewhere where every year they wrote down a tick mark. And in fact, the dates that they gave were divided by 12 when we consumed Manetho's work. There's a note that the translator gives, or the transmitter, I should say, gives. Hold on, Fresi has the data.
For Narmer,
Yeah, for Narmer,
as early as 3100 BC.
3100 BC. So that is bullshit. Sorry for the language, but I think that is a bad date. And I'll tell you why. Because as Syncellis is looking through this stuff, he's like, these idiots used a dating system that doesn't make sense. They were obviously using lunar cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, there's no obvious to that. They were literally telling you numbers, and you dismissed them, and you divided them all by 12. So we don't know, because we don't have Manetho's work, and Manetho, being an Egyptian priest, might have the best, most intact version of these numbers. We have divided by 12 numbers after the page in which this guy goes, I'm not doing this anymore. So we don't know the length of reign for any of these guys. Like, we don't know if they were co-reigning, nothing. But what we do see, even with this sort of manipulated work, is that it goes back really far. And before Menes, they believed that there were demigods. That's the Egyptian belief, according to Manetho. And before the demigods, there were gods. And they have, a group of rulers in both of these. And then there was an intermediary period between the demigods, and Menes, called the rule of the spirits. And unfortunately, Syncellis has kind of destroyed the data there. But I think it's a period that's in the term about 5,000 years, 2,000 years, somewhere in there. And you go, okay, so if that's the case, then Egypt is a living hotspot that is in the right region of the world to tie into like Noahic stories. And it may be that there are structures there which predate a flood and that survived it. And then what we're seeing is the reconstruction, or the rebuilding, or the reinhabitation of a region. I'm not saying that's for everything, but it's a little suspicious when the first couple pyramids they build are like the oldest ones they think they built were kind of garbage. And then when they're on pyramid number 5, it's the Great Pyramid or something,
Mm-hmm.
And then everything after that gets worse and smaller. And
So
then every so often
there is a
they
peak.
burst out something huge,
Mm-hmm. To come back to the archaeology field, I think the lessons that we learn in the last 5 years, I would just say it now, because we kept hearing before that the science is settled, and I think that what we learn is that the science is never settled.
Yeah.
And that's the huge benefit that the science had, and that's making a huge difference between analyzing and researching and believing,
Yeah.
and not defining science as a cult, as a religion, because it's not a cult,
It's
it's
just
not a
data.
religion. It's just data. And
Yeah.
data, maybe you see the data today in a different way, tomorrow you can see it in a different way, and in 2 years you see it in a different way that you haven't even thought about. I mean, I think that's the huge benefit that we should all be able to see, and we should all be able to accept, but it takes a lot of power a lot of
I think we can all do it. I think that's what's beautiful about the modern apparatus. Like the internet gave us something big, and what it gave us was the ability to reach out to people that have published papers and get those full papers for free. And sometimes they just put them up for free anyway. So you get access to like what's represented there is maybe $1 million plus of somebody else's work that they're willingly sharing. And I think you're very right. We are living through something right now where if we're smart, we're going to use science to then go back and look at these stories. We're going to look at what's emerging from science and then connect it back. So we've been trying to do that.
The key sentence from the beginning, Greg. That's if you are smart.
Very deeply, we believe it. So when I go and look through research today, I have a lens on that contains the book, in my mind, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Bhagavad Gita, the stories that Graham was telling about these old places that were being built all over the place. And I'm looking for reasons as to why this would happen with very tight details from scriptural accounts or from what I would call historical accounts, to see if we can validate some of them. Like in the time of Syncelis, which is a long time, over 1,000 years ago, and even in the time of Manetho, 2,000 years ago, nobody thought the world was all that old. And now we think it's pretty old. So, I would almost imagine that people were laughing at the Egyptian concepts in that region, because the only other people who had dates that went back very far were the Sumerians. And early Sumerian accounts were, so what they would have had access to contemporarily around the time of 0 or 200 BC or somewhere in there. There was a book that was put out, I forget the name of it. It was by a priest named Berosus, and Berosus had access to the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, basically mythologies. And he had a timeline that brought the foundation of the kingship on earth. And take that to be whatever you mean, whatever you want it to be, but that's the statement. The kingship on earth began like 400 and some thousand years before the time of Berosus. And the more recent Sumerian kings list that we found, that's in Oxford's collection, says about 270,000 years, 260,000 years. These numbers are ridiculous up until you get human bones going back that far, and it makes you scratch your head. Like, how? So they were probably the most laughed about cosmology story in the region. You've got the Hebrews being like, the world started in 4,500 BC, and then you've got the Romans who are like, that sounds about right, but we think it's more like 5,500 BC. And then you've got the Sumerians being like, no, it was several 100,000 years ago. Like, what's that number? And they're not
do that math.
Yeah, they're not off by much. So you think, you get a bunch of stories, at least out of that region, that that tell you there was a continuation of information across the death of civilization. So everyone's going to have a little bit of that, and everybody's going to have some different version of that, and somebody's numbers aren't going to get, just think of this guy in 1,000 years ago who divided by 12 all the dates. Like, that probably happened a few times by other people way before him, as they were thinking of how ridiculous something they were trying to translate was circa 5,000 BC. But don't dismiss the idea of archaeologists existing for the entirety of civilization. This mindset of like, we must make it work under our current paradigm. But unfortunately for the people that think like that, they better stop thinking like that, because some really weird stuff is coming up. Like some really truly bizarre things that they defy explanation. Because I think we talked earlier, like there's this problem. If you've got 300,000 years of humans, then where's the evidence? Well, what if we don't do anything? What if humans, even with our big brains, live these like druidic lifestyles that don't leave any trace of anything? And maybe we're missing, we don't get these pieces of wanting to build big structures and cities and leadership becoming a thing and legacy becoming a thing until later. Well, that's the story of Enoch, in a sense, that at some point directly before a great flood, before Enoch was born, one generation before Enoch, According to him, it could have been 1,000 generations, who knows? But according to him, the story he was getting was that these beings called Watchers, which roughly I would translate as beautiful angel, like a beautiful divine being, that incorporated though, bodied, descended into the land, and then started to genetically mix with the population through copulation. They had children with the humans. These children, we don't have a lot of data on this, but what's explicitly put in these old books is they made giants. That one of the things that happened here were giants. There's some stuff that's hard to interpret, but it could be that there were several basically being races that were coming out of this that were weird and bad. And that story is what Enoch says, not the Adam and Eve thing, not humans getting out of control, but Watchers, these beings getting out of control, is the reason for the flood. There was no other way to tenet it. They had to go around and destroy all of the monuments, all of the works, and essentially he sees Noah as something's different with him, but like he sees Noah as a compromised solution to make it so he doesn't have to destroy all the intelligent life.
Is it mentioned what's the source of the flood?
Waters from above, waters from below. Yeah,
Okay,
not too clear.
Okay.
Yeah, not too clear. But it was it's the even the duration of the flooding events change. So the thing we do know is that roughly 12,000 years ago, roughly 10,000 BC, something happened to trigger a rapid upheaval in the climate. Now, there is a natural cycle that we see in the climate record. It goes up, the temps go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. And it happens on a fairly regular cycle. And we've been in this upswing that just keeps going right now. It's not honestly, it's not unique. We've seen times before this where it's upswinged and held for significant amount of time. We're only 12,000 years into this, right? But there's other periods that went 30, 40,000 years. But we see it there, and what it turns into is that event, it used to be seen as something that happened over several thousand years, and as time goes on, it's the length of the event of this warming is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And something triggered off something like dominoes, and the ice melted, and the sea levels go up 300 feet. Yeah, and so you've got the makings of a flood. You've got the makings of a global flood. You've got the makings of some really nasty, weird climate, and you've got the story that says that was gonna happen, not that it did happen. And so we can kind of get this peer back. And I think when I read, or when I express First Enoch, I say, look, we don't need to take this literally, but we should look at the outline of the story here and say, is there anything else that kind of ties in? So we get into this weird depiction in First Enoch of Noah, by the way. This is like the weirdest part of the story. I think that my research partner and I are still trying to figure this out. Because it's one of these things that the science is telling us something that this old book is telling us, and I hate it. I hate these kind of. I wish there were more people that we could work on something like this, because I feel like I'm about to say something that's true to the book and also true to science. Draw your own conclusion, okay? In the Book of Enoch, at the very end, they describe Noah. And Noah's weird. Like, Noah's weird to the point where Lamech, Noah's father, is like having to discuss with his wife, and like, is this my child? Is this, because there's angels out there having babies with the people, and he's like, he looks essentially like a Watcher, and the way it's described is like snow white skin, eyes that don't look normal, hair that's as white as wool, and he also could talk from a very young age. Like, from the Book of Enoch, it sounds like he's out of the womb and talking. So he's weird. He's weird. He's it's like he's got some genetic edits. He's got something weird going on there. And so that's what you get there, that Noah is apparently this. Like, Noah is apparently this avatar of weirdness, potentially looking just exactly like one of these superhumans, or whatever you want to call an angel. And then there's, everybody I think knows the Noah story. So it's the gist is, Noah lands his ark, seeds the Levant, and he has a bunch of children, and they have a bunch of children, and they divide up the land, and that's how you get all the cultures that are there today. Well, if we put that event to, like, let's say 10,000 BC, then maybe that starts to explain Göbekli Tepe and all the rest of the civilization that just kind of spurted up there at that timeline, right? But that doesn't get us into, like, I think I'll just tell you this other piece. We'll just, I guess, just leave it alone after this. In that region, we're now seeing, like, in the region of, it would be where Armenia is today, or Western or Eastern Turkey. So somewhere around, okay. There's a gene that spread out, two genes that spread out. And I don't remember at the top of my mind what they are. I think it's SLC22 and SLC26A or something. These are the two genes that depigmented human and created, basically, they're the genes responsible for humans going from copper skin tones and darker skin tones to what we see up in Norway. And depigmentation, demyelination. So you've got an account saying that this was an ultra white person, white as snow. And then you've got the genetic data just now also landing on those dates. And their dates are like, they're seeing it move into Europe by 8500 BC, which is 1500 years or so post the event. So it would be potentially one of Noah's children heading west. And that's kind of been breaking me and my research partner, because it seems like too close, and I don't know if anybody's connected all that up yet, that it supports at least one end of a larger picture, you know?
I mean, the story had to have a start from somewhere, right?
I mean, I'm still of the opinion that I don't know if we know where all the seeds came from. And I tend to think, like, I don't know. There's a Sumerian account where there was 7 seeds, basically. And I don't know if I should trust them for anything, but, like, I think Noah was just one of them. But I think if we were to go around and provide the same level of heavy genetic research into specific traits that emerged right around then, we don't focus on skin color. Like, let's focus on a lot of stuff. Like, let's focus on traits that are seemingly environmentally linked, but it could have this other explanation. We should be looking all around the world right now for 10,000 BC to, I don't know, 8,500 BC, and see, is this when everybody got seeded? Is this when arcs across the globe opened up and people poured out of them into a new world, and for some decently large amount of time were able to multiply fruitfully without running into people that they didn't know what they looked like? Because by the time you get up to Egypt, and Egypt's carving stuff, right, the faces are not what you expect. They're not a homogenized face. It's not Sumer, where everybody's face looks this. Everybody looks like me and you, big beards, like they're curly, like big feet, big nose. The whole. Everybody's looking the same. Then in Egypt, the when they would get these busts done, man, there'd be like, there'd be people who you're like, they look like models, and they look kind of like they look like they're I don't know, like hardy, and they look like they've got bones where these guys didn't have bones, like really high up or really down low, and everybody's face starts changing. I mean, there's this part, the second intermediary period, where you get these faces there where they look, I don't know, like American iron workers is the best way I could, like very like beefy people. So a lot of people went in and out of what I think used to be maybe a global capital or something like this, like somewhere where everybody would get together and meet up once a month. I don't know. But I think all across the world that this happened, and whether or not those seeded peoples took heavy root or were able to survive through whatever it is they, was around them, the pressures around them. I think we do see that on every continent, there were major civilizations building big stuff with agriculture, with all writing, with all this other stuff. And you go, okay, so you're telling me for like 290,000 years, none of this happened. And then it just starts happening. Well, part of what Enoch was talking about was forbidden technologies that got handed down and given to us. And, I don't know. I think it's just, we either have to be on one side or the other here. We have to be on the side of something really interfered with us, or we interfere with ourselves. And that's why we're where we are today, because something from the outside boosted us up. or we're missing so much stuff that like this civilization should have happened several times before. Because what we see in the demographic record, which is population study, is that consensus across all the people that we've found that do population research, they will not typically go before 10,000 BC. A lot of them don't make it past like 5,000 because it gets too blurry. The data is too blurry. But of the people of the publishing that we've seen that contains stories from 10,000 BC or estimates from 10,000 BC, the high estimate is there were 10 million humans. And the low estimate is that there was 1 million. And from that, we got to 8.1 or 8.2 billion as of today, meaning in 12,000 years, we can potentially 8,000x our population. Well, we had 12,000 years before this, several times.
Yeah.
We've had 40,000 years.
True, but you can also always think about an exponential growth, and it's always, I think there are a lot of things which are coming in. So of course you have a lot of variables, and I think that's the at the end that's the huge benefit of it, that we are allowed to have options and to think that it could be either this, either that. And you've said before, it's depend on which side you are. I don't think you have to pick a side. I think you can create your own side. That's the benefit of the data that we have today. Like you can come with a new.
It might be all
theory.
of the above,
Exactly.
like it literally may be all of the above. And I think we've got to see why would it be important to figure this out? Is it an exercise in understanding where we came from, or is it, I tend to see it more like a treasure hunt, like that what we're not realizing is that there could be, what we're looking at could be knowledge advanced to our own that was developed in the past, things that maybe we got past this current type of world we're in. And if we put on our thinking caps, like I think the world of the near future, the next, we'll say 500 years, will look nothing like the one we have today.
I think every decision that we make today is pushing us 0.5 degrees to the left or 0.5 degrees to the right, and I think that's somehow the big difference. And if it was a big reset, if it was this big flood there, then it could be that that's something which made us reset everything.
It could be. There could be a moment. I mean, you can glean it now, right? Like this is a conversation we can really only have today. But
Correct.
did we ever think we would invent life? And not in this like Jekyll and Hyde, not Frankenstein, but like something which is going to have the appearance and function of being, of intelligence and perhaps even emotion that can do things better than us. I mean, I'm talking about AI or AGI. I don't think I remember 20, 30 years ago, I've been in computers for a while. Someone I really respected, and really believed everything that they would come out of their mouth. They were very good with Linux and Unix and stuff like this. And they were a brilliant programmer. And the AI thing came up, but it was more like 25 years ago as a joke, right? It's like AI. What are you talking about? Like an if statement? Like if the user says, what's the weather? We have to find the word weather and then like key an API call to go retrieve the weather and then give that back. We're going to format all
maybe
that.
also a loop function in between. If we don't find the word weather from the first try, we just loop it until we find
we
the
just
word
keep
weather.
going.
So,
yeah, and that'll crash the system if you don't get
most
that.
probably.
Yeah. So it's like that. But I mean, this individual told me like you're never going to see it. He's like, what you're talking about is never going to happen. Because I was asking, could we get like conversational level or like something that would trick you? Because it was in the media, it was in movies, it was in the Matrix and all this kind of stuff. And now with what the math of how these systems work and the architecture of how they work, they were being dreamed up a while ago. And somehow the consumer market and their demand for better looking video games got us these insane GPUs that get us this ability to do math at a floating point level, right? It's not in a
As I
it's
said,
floating, which is fuzzy enough for these systems to go wild.
I mean, you could say video games, or you could say crypto mining.
Yeah,
Could go
crypto
both
money
ways.
it gives it some invented currency that like, doesn't make sense to anybody. That just literally doesn't come into yeah. And so we not only did we learn how to make these chips, we're making them at scales that are sub-viral sizes. Like we our manufacturing capabilities are nearly at the protein level. Geez, I mean, like 3 nanometers. Are you kidding? Have you seen these things under microscopes? You just go like, there's no way how did we?
We cannot fathom anymore. We cannot really understand how small they are. I mean, yes, we talk about numbers. We say that we talk about sizes, but we are not able to understand how small they are. We are not able to get that anymore.
Incredibly small. They're smaller than a cell.
Yeah.
Like at 3 nanometers, you're way under the size of a human skin cell. Like
And
it's just
if we talk about quantum computers, it's getting even more complicated.
it's getting spooky. And I don't have, so I can speak to the outside of that. I'm not into quantum engineering. I'm not into quantum coding, but it's getting spooky, right? There's a statement that's been going around now. It's I would say it's less of a rumor and more of a science folks thinking maybe we have an answer for something. But physicists for a long time have believed in the multiverse. Just in a sense, like that like there's like there could be for every the universe could do this really weird thing where it's essentially constantly fracturing.
Every
And
decision.
yeah. And when they have a quantum chip that's taking an equation that would normally take like the heat death of the universe worth of time, like a billion years to solve. Like, and you can have things like this, right? Like you can have things that you would like stick into a coding platform and run it, and it would just churn and churn and churn because you've given it some sort of maybe recursive math or something where it's going to have to work on it forever. That's not hard to do. You can do that. I can do that. We can go find equations and run them on our crappy computers, and they'll just do that for the rest of their life until they get unplugged. So they're taking something like this, and it's a format problem in a sense. Like it's everybody knows the problem they fed it, and it goes done in a couple of seconds. And so that's opened up this really weird line of thinking because it's like, how do they do that? And so one of the things I've heard that is freaky is that like there's an infinite number of universes, right? So if that's the first thing you've got to agree to. There's an infinite number of universes. And if that is true, then this chip that we just made exists an infinite number of times. Therefore, when we turn it on, we're opening a gateway to all the other times and all the other timelines that it's turned on. And these chips are working together across infinite universes to solve that problem together. And that stuff should make your brain just pretzel in. Like,
Man, you just destroyed my. I have no words now. I haven't heard this theory.
it's a theory.
This is so interesting.
It's a theory. And you say, okay, did we accidentally get to like interdimensional portals through qubit computing? Because all these weird things show up, right? You got to keep the things really cold. So basically that means you got to control the influence on them. And like, you really want to get a clean read. And it might be in the quiet space that you can look or you can bridge into other universes. Because if that's the case, what does that do for something like propulsion or energy? Right? Like, could you bridge over and say, well, we've got an infinite number of hydroelectric dams, I guess. Like, could we extract it? Like, can we?
Or maybe with a different propulsion engine. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And what's I think communication. Could we communicate across this? Like, I just don't know. I mean, I've heard some really wild stuff when it comes to universes and bending time and space and stuff, but this is like a practical, we've got to figure out how it works now, not we're trying to think of a theory of how to build something. And like I've heard of folks that were pretty consistent. Like there was a guy, he's a physicist named Ronald Mallet, and he had come up with years ago an idea that he's like, if we do this, we can create basically a box which can hold information that exists outside of space and time, meaning the second that we create this device in this box, it will contain messages from the future. And if we put messages into it, they'll become available across the entire space and time. And so he wanted to do this by getting up into space and creating what's called a ring laser. So essentially ultra dense electromagnetic containment around a specific space. And he's like, you can only do it in orbit. You can only do it in low gravity. So the cost to do that is in the billions, trillions. I have no idea, but very expensive. Yeah. But he was like, if you flip this on, the second it goes on, you'll, as long as it's turned on into the future, you should be able to get messages to exist in this special space, in this space where we believe we've nullified out all the external forces.
And also time.
Isn't that wild?
That's crazy.
It's wild. And so he used to talk about that, but like somebody went out and did something even crazier, you know, and I think when we are kind of like the fabric of the different fabrics, the different contracts that hold our society together are now all under review. You know, if there is this weird universal quantum computing thing that puts us into some like crazy, like, okay, we can do these really weird things now. I don't even know where that goes, but I know that, you know, from a perspective of like an engineer, like the computing that you can get out of quantum is insanity levels. Like it's so fast just for specific tasks. But I mean, this is just the race to design and determine what tasks it can do quicker.
I mean, if you
And
think
what you're
about the
getting out
first
of,
computer, if you think about the first computer was also exactly created in the same way, like only for a mathematical calculation, and it was
yeah,
two floors big or 3 floors, and
yeah,
everything started like this only for specific tasks, and then it's expanding.
yeah. And it was right. We get these GPUs that showed up where we started to change some of those ideas around. Like we didn't need the math to be perfect, so we just needed to be right. You know, like in a ballpark. And so we get like that was a big jump. The idea that you could go from these old systems of ones and zeros to, which I mean, GPUs still do that, but it's more like when you ask a GPU 2 plus 2, it'll be like 4.0000006, 3.999999994. It'll never give you 4 because it's faster to give you that other thing. That's what it's designed to do. But quantum on the other end is just crazy. Like I've read about it. I don't understand. It's like you're not getting ones and zeros, you're getting a gradient between 0 and 1. And then you do that calculation a ton and you get the mean, like the average. You're taking like this part that like bubbles up and says like this is probably the right answer. But you're also getting stuff that's way to the right of the answer, way to the left of the answer. Anyways, I think these technologies, especially AI, like I think people have really underestimated what's going on right now. And what's going on right now is we made a pattern recognition machine and like it knows how to do it. So when you first get this technology, my first exposure to GPT, generative predictive text, I'm like, this is going to ruin the internet. That's the only thing I could see. That's as far as I could see. It was like, nope, put this in the hands of anybody that knows how to use proxies, like anybody who knows how to get past minor security things, and someone's going to go onto a website like Reddit and just boot up like 200 accounts, and they're just going to run their own crap, and like the next step would be doing some behavioral stuff around that, you know. But you're going to be able to basically, I remember thinking like you just be able to look at 10 answers and you'll just be able to pick one at a time and say, that's the message I'm sending. That's the message I'm sending. And it would amplify an individual like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know as you keep going with that it's like, yeah, no, it can trick people. Like, yeah, sure. It's past the Turing test. Sure. It's got an IQ of 136 right now, according to the latest stuff that's coming out. And you're like, yeah, it can do that. But it can also, you can feed it patterns and it can start to predict like what the next logical working pattern is, which they then apply to protein folding, and then they apply it to molecules. And like I think you know, material science just got 100 plus thousand, 100 more than 100,000 viable materials that like or seemingly viable materials. And it's like, even if the AI hallucinated half of those, we don't develop anywhere close to 50,000 materials a year, nor have we developed that many in the entire history of humanity. Like, so we're going to potentially be getting new things out of this, like new materials, you know, and we're probably already seeing that. They were probably already seeing the influence of that, and we're just not going to know about it because not everybody's going to go publish a paper, you know?
I think the things that we should use, or I'm saying we should use like I'm the king of the universe, but I, you know what I mean. So the thing where I see that the big benefit of AI would be this the science, and I'm not only talking about strictly about science, but I've seen the other day an article that an AI scanner discovered a breast cancer, which was in the microscopic phase. So it was so small that you couldn't see it with something. That's what.
That's
That's
wild.
one purpose that we should use AI for,
Yeah,
to be able to
and
save lives.
there's some radiologists listening right now, and you're thinking your job is nice and safe, but it's not. Like you make mistakes, and these things will make mistakes too. But they're gonna
Less.
every time they make this is what I always tell people about AI. Every time it makes a mistake, there's 20 engineers looking at that mistake saying, how do we avoid it again? And it's a permanent, we're not, it's a permanent, usually a permanent fix. When you, the skilled person, skilled professional, make a mistake, I mean, do you really like subject yourself to the thing? I think a lot of times it gets written off. And so medical science has crested, far past where I don't know if I think everyone could kind of see medical science getting this precise, but it's gotten to the point where the cures or the treatments or even the diagnostics are so complicated, and
Mhm.
they're a doctor making a mistake nowadays. It's like, well, I don't think you can hold it against them. I remember a few years ago in the States, they moved malpractice and limits of liability way down because it's such a hard job to but an AI can do a job like that very quickly. You could have an AI diagnostician who I mean, this isn't WebMD anymore, where they're looking at all of the lab work and then summarizing the lab work and cross-referencing against the lab work to say, like, well, this plus this in these 6 million other cases equaled this.
They can find patterns easier and faster than you, because at the end everything it's a matter of pattern. It's that why were the doctors, sorry for interrupting you, but why were the doctors in the past so good? Because they read a lot of cases, they read a lot of books about medicines, they read about patterns.
And on top of that, you expect them to have some like understanding of organic chemistry, which I think is only understood by about like 3 people in the whole world. Like it's every doctor's like, I just made it through OChem, thank God. But like something like like really medicine's taking place on oftentimes on a macro level, and something like
Mm,
AI will really make it a lot easier to understand the micro level of it. Because
absolutely.
a lot of people don't understand this, but we're holograms. We're
Mm,
a trillion cells that, when put together, look like us, and all trillion of those cells have problems. They all need something. And when they don't get specific things, or when they break in specific ways, you get illnesses that occur at the macro level. So really everything that's wrong with an individual can be addressed at the cellular level. It can be addressed at those levels, and we have tools to do such now. And like, so our future of medicine it might look really weird, especially with things like CRISPR, because now we have a technology that uses phages, which are a small complex virus, to go. These are naturally occurring things, by the way. We just take advantage of them, and we can load in RNA or DNA with an enzyme, and this enzyme can go directly into a cell. Well, what a phage does is it lands on the surface of a cell, and it's like a little syringe, and it squirts in this material. That material makes it into the nucleus of the cell if it's DNA with Cas9. It can also just be RNA. And I'll give you a quick difference. DNA, think of DNA as like a book, and think of RNA as copies that come off of the DNA and then get handed to something else called a ribosome to create stuff. So ribosomes are inside of cells, they're like 3D printers. What they do is they use material that's in the cell to fold protein, to take proteins and create protein chains, and those become cell walls. They become other ribosomes. They become a lot of stuff. They become, food for the cell. Like there's a lot of stuff going on there. So we can hijack that today. We know how to do this. So if you had an individual like with let's say breast cancer, well, nowadays we're going to say take it out excise it, hit it with radiation, and radiation will kill the weak cells and leave the good ones, and we'll get a survival chance that's above zero, but not 100%. And that's for every illness, right? It's above zero, but not 100%. Some of those percentages are really low.
And mostly reducing the quality of life a lot.
Absolutely. Right. And so what if you could address the problem at the cellular level? And like, you can now. So it's just how safe it is, how we extrapolate, how to do this without DNA is the dangerous thing to mess with, in a sense. Like, you have a gene that you're like, well, that's the gene responsible for XYZ thing. And you're like, but it actually was ABC thing plus XYZ thing. And now the patient, the red blood cells fell apart, or cancer's just going right through their body now. You just, like we don't have the genomes, but we've had it for like 20 years, but we're still, still trying to understand like how exactly our body uses that DNA to make things and what those things actually contribute to. So we're cresting into an age, though, where we've got these thinking machines that can compound can kind of go through all this this crazy amount of information and potentially simulate out what's going to happen to the level of like, addressing all sorts of problems in our bodies. And one of those big problems is aging. And aging's not a big problem with CRISPR because now you've got a way to make things that are this small. You're making things that are smaller than those 2 nanometer chips now, but barely, because on the scale of phage, 50 nanometers for these phages. And the, what's going to change is everything. Like, our whole way to look at everything is going to be changing if we can make it, if we can keep everything together, if we can maybe not get so caught up in the day to day. I just saw Elon Musk just talked in the Middle East. He's doing some talks, and like him or hate him, Elon has a lot of resources. He's very dedicated to doing things, and he gets some stuff right, he gets some stuff wrong. But just to like let the audience feel a little better about things, there is an optimist, and his name is Elon Musk, about the future, and he thinks AI, robotics, automation, this connection of things is going to create universal income. And he caveated that. He's like, I don't think it's going to be universal basic income. He said, I think it's going to be universal high income, meaning we're cresting into a reality in which goods and services will become free. And if you're paying attention, it looks like all the pieces could be in place for this.
I like the idea, of course, but
Yeah.
I'm still a bit skeptical about it. We still have a big drug in the world, and that's the power that everyone is needing, and you see it on all the political levels. You see it everywhere, and you don't have the power anymore if you have universal, even basic income.
Yeah, I think that's the elephant in the room. When and it comes from all sources, right? When we do our research in ancient history, and that bridges past ancient at some point, because we can track like a story influencing further things. One of the reasons I looked into First Enoch, which is this old book, right? I saw some artwork at the Vatican, St. Peter's throne. And I have a schooling in communication arts and visual design and things. I have a good mind for symbols. Like, if you tell me, like, look for circles that are this big, and that means something, I'll go find all the circles that are that big. Look for this an eagle somewhere, and that means I'll go find all that and I can sort of translate that out. So I see this thing in the Vatican that's like this throne of St. Peter, and it's got a lot of symbolism going on. That could be a whole different topic we get into, but it's hard without like showing it and all that. But it's telling a story, and I was like, where the heck did this story come from? And it's in none of their books. It's not in the Bible. It's not in First Enoch. It's not in nothing I've read so far. But to know that like they knew something when they created that nobody else still knows, but they know it. It's like, that's power. That is a representation of power. The priest class all around the world would hold, has this power. And for a while, I think it was just the priests, in a sense. that they were more powerful than Pharaoh, which we see with Akhenaten, right? There's a figure in Egyptian history where Akhenaten, not born Akhenaten, earns that name, changes his name. He has this end of his name that's Aten, and Aten is a way to look at God. It's a monoism of God. Unfortunately, the priests were pushing a pantheistic model. And they didn't like this, and they didn't like it at all. So the priests we don't know really what happened to him, but we know that the city he built was leveled, and we know that a lot of the things that depicted him were destroyed, and we know that Tutankhamun, which is next down the line, took the name Amun, which is the priestly name. It's the idea of what the priests were trying to do, and that word sort of evolves into Amen and all of this. So it's like people have had power by holding on to secrets, but we live in the world of no more secrets, I think. It's the age of Aquarius, Paul. Like we're supposed to be, like this is the time when everything's supposed to come to the surface, and I think it is. I think if you're paying attention, you've got people in our U.S. Congress. They're going to Congress and talking about UAPs and UFOs. This isn't 50 years ago where they would just say it was swamp gas. And you've got consciousness research looking like it's showing that we have ESP. Like,
isn't it crazy that nobody gives a crap about it anymore?
No, I saw somebody. Are you familiar with Gary Nolan?
Yeah.
Brilliant inventor, right? Like really just like good head on their shoulders. And he's always been interested in weird stuff. And now he's like actively in the field, right? And I had heard him say something and it just stuck. He's like, I bet if the best evidence ever came out tomorrow, like full on, it would last like a week.
Yeah.
And then everybody would forget about it. Like you could have an alien on the White House lawn, and for like a week, people would be crazy about it. And then I've seen it. I think we've all seen it. It's like,
and then Kim Kardashian has Kim Kardashian has a new car, and it's gone.
Kanye drops a weird political album, and nobody cares.
It's unbelievable. We have the attention span of a caterpillar, like. And this is as a society, it's crazy, and it's happening. I'm having the benefit, so the one of the good things that happened to me due to the moving from one country to another is that I'm able to speak multiple languages, and I'm able to read in multiple languages, and I get the news in multiple languages. So I do follow. I would just call them multiple worlds. I have a New York Times subscription because I'm a US fanboy, and I still love to read the news in the US. I'm seeing the news in Germany because I live here. I'm still checking out the news in Romania because something crazy is happening there at the moment with the presidential elections. But we don't have any kind of memory about important things. We don't. Yeah. We treat everything as a sensational news, and then it's gone.
It's the commercialization of information. When you start saying like, I mean, what are we engaging in right now? as we lament the concept of writing and getting paid to spread information, like this is kind of what a lot of us do for a living. This is how a lot of us make it is by saying like, I can tell you a story, and if you want, you can throw 15 cents in my hat, as I tell you the story, right? But the idea that you've got to continually produce more stories to sell more papers, to sell more advertising. That's the story. I mean, that's News 101. When I was younger, I used to, here in the States, like, I guess there's a lot of propaganda and stuff. And our media consolidated a few years ago. Used to be a lot of independent media organizations, but over time they get acquired by competitors, and they there's maybe 4 or 5 in the country today that are bigs, and then there's hundreds at the another level, and then there's, I would say, hundreds of thousands of people they call themselves influencers that are regurgitating news incorrectly usually
and commenting and reacting.
Yeah, which seems like a copyright problem, but I guess that's legal here. But years ago, I used to flip on BBC, and it was always so weird just to see like what BBC was covering compared to what our news was covering. And yeah, like global events, they don't really get covered in our country that much. But BBC was always big about that. They would, here's this big thing going on, somewhere that's not here in the UK, you know. But it's madness. Like we need people out there reporting, but the editorialization of that, and honestly, it's not an issues based thing, right? Like it's not like the media's they do try to push issues, but it's not like they're going to dig their heels in on something and get societal change to happen. They're part of an estate that is right next to major corporations, capitalist aligned interests. I'm not trying to say capitalism is bad, but interests that are aligned around shareholder value and keeping people employed, and regardless of how beneficial it is to society. Like they're not factoring that in when they do something. They're not saying is this good or bad for society. They're just like, can we get the story as straight as we possibly can and get it out before somebody else does?
It's not about informing, it's about making money.
Yeah.
I've read the book Hate Incorporated by Matt Taibbi. Oh, that took a while. And he's saying that one of the crazy things that I remember from that book is that Fox News made in the period pre-Trump election and after Trump election, in those 5 years, I think a $20.5 billion profit. Because they said whatever their publicum wanted to hear.
Yeah. And that's all you gotta, at some point I get, I get it, but I feel like these companies do manipulative things. And that's where I think the line should be drawn there when you can see essentially like, I was in school for communications, and as part of the education, I learned how to design things. As part of it, I learned how to read symbol, and I ended up going off into like advertising after that. And we learned ad theory, and then we learned dark ad theory. There's stuff you can do that is very old in concept. But maybe you shouldn't, depending on maybe you shouldn't take those tactics, like, because they're highly manipulative tactics. And one of the people that I'd learned about was this guy named Edward Bernays. This is a name that you could go look up, Edward Bernays, and he wrote a book called Propaganda. And Bernays's uncle, this is a long time. Sorry, I should preface this better. This is in like the 1920s, and Bernays is an up and coming person. He's seen as the father of public relations, and that's advertising. But advertising is a way to do public relations.
Mm-hmm.
And Bernays's uncle is Sigmund Freud. So he is understanding the human psyche applied to business and applied to how do you change someone's mind. And he's sort of famously the person that's like, how do you get a want to become a need? So he did some really wild stuff, man. One of the campaigns he did that really always stood out to me was, here in America we have this brand called Dixie, and they make these little tiny plastic, or they're paper cups with like wax lining on them. It's a one-time
knows
use
Dixie.
cup.
Everyone
Yeah.
knows Dixie in the whole world. I don't know why.
Well, now they do. So when Dixie was small, they were trying to figure out like how in the world do we sell these things, because um any reasonable person is just going to take a glass, they can reuse it. They're going to use like a tin canteen or something, like they can reuse it. So why is it that our product is going to sell? And what Bernays came up with was, it's not about saying your product's good, it's about calling everything else dirty. So he created this idea that was like, you can't get that glass super clean. It could have germs and bacteria in it. So we use Dixie cups, because Dixie cups are always fresh and they're never contaminated, and da 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 da. And so he's playing into a fear mentality. He's playing into like a narrative of like, we use paper plates not because they're convenient, but because, if maybe they're never dirty when you set them out on the table. Like, they're not, your guests are never going to look at the soap stain on there and say, wash it again. So it's stuff like that, when that starts scaling up, Bernays's theory has become basically weaponized as propaganda. How do you get somebody to hate their fellow man? Well, you got to make a cartoon. You got to tell some believable lies. Like you've got to. It's not always just like getting angry at the enemy. Sometimes it's getting someone to invoke a sense of civic duty or pride or whatever. So he really was influential in taking Freud's work and then applying it at the mass scale. And by the 40s and 50s, advertising was a thing, and before that, it really wasn't. Ad firms start standing up and start figuring out how to get into the pocketbooks of the average person. You know, there's a great show called Mad Men that gets into some of that, like really weird way that they would present something. Like they show it's fictional, but it's just tobacco got banned from advertising for in a few decades ago, but they used to be able to advertise. And there was a time when they were running ads, and it was like in the 60s, and then scientific data was coming out saying that smoking's not good for you. And so, like in the show, there's this famous thing where they're like, okay, well, you're trying to sell tobacco, and everybody else is trying to sell tobacco has the same problem, so you can't really claim it's healthy or whatever. They used to claim that. They used to claim the benefits of smoking, like it increases concentration and all these things. So it was just like, why don't we just say it's toasted, for one of these brands? It's a cool, we're just going to go with phrasing now. We're just going to go with, we'll make it cool. Toasted's a cool phrase. Lucky Strikes, it's toasted. And this was just an appeal campaign that ends up working for them. And then smoking, tobacco advertisements just go into a crazy direction after that, where they're like anthropomorphizing, camels, like that are wearing denim jackets and looking cool and all this kind of stuff.
Everyone knows the cowboy from the Marlboro commercials.
Yeah, that was Leo Burnett. That was a real ad firm that did that. And like these are advanced mind manipulation tactics. They take a lot of work and effort. They're not easy to do. You can't screw up any part of it or people see right through it. But we got really good at that, and as humanity, we got really good at that. And politics started to take advantage of stuff like that too. And we can do it all sorts of ways now, through books, through media, and especially through things like the news, because the news can do this thing where they shape a narrative and they stick with it, and they continue to push out either just a line, and where we got to see that in our country. I'm sure wherever you were too, man. COVID. Now we can actually talk about it, right? Are we allowed to talk about that yet, or is that, do we have to bleep that part out and say weird, weird things? Because there was a time when you couldn't even say it.
Yeah.
I was on YouTube back then, and we would say that, and we'd have to bleep it out, or else we get a strike. And I was like, "What? We can't even address it." But we were getting a story. We were getting just stories. We weren't getting truth, and they're passing it off as truth. And that's not, like, in my opinion, the job of the media at all. Now what you are is your propagandist. You're an advertiser, and you're taking money or something, influence in from somebody with power, and you're not caring about the ramifications of what you're doing. You're just doing it, and it's going to damage us. And I think we're all damaged because of that.
It is crazy the levels on which we are polarized in this moment. So the levels in which we hate each other. I have the feeling that it's only black and white, but it's only black and white everywhere I look. So it's only black and white in the US. It's only black and white in Europe. It's only black and white. There is no discussion perspective. There is no. It's really hard to have this. This discussion, this, we don't have to agree on everything we talk about. We don't have to have the same principles. We have to discuss about things. And that's why I said the science was settled, because that was one of the arguments that the COVID press was using back then. And it
was so irresponsible. That period was just so
exactly.
so many people revealed that they're checked out of what they're doing.
It's again power, Greg. It's a grand power. For me, it was again of proof of what power can be. You have the power to tell me to stay in the house. It's crazy. And they made I will never forget, here in Germany, they allowed you to go outside for a walk in the mornings or to go with your dog. And that's it. And this is like, now if I think about it, oh my God, man. This is so crazy to think.
And they got it. You got it all over the place like this. Yeah.
And we all were convinced, and like we have
Yeah.
it's
I
only
think
for a while.
people were convinced on different ends of it, and I think that was what
Absolutely.
was honestly so weird about it. It had created, you know what it did, it really did is it created a, I would say, a political discussion, like politicians were taking sides on things, so it becomes a political discussion. But I don't know, have you ever heard the thing that like it's kind of, I guess, like an anecdote, but it's this way to consider civilized conversation. And they say never talk about politics and never talk about religion, and you can be friends with anybody.
No, I don't know, but it sounds pretty
Makes
fair.
sense,
I have
right?
to admit,
Like,
absolutely,
yeah, if you see, you
absolutely,
can be
man.
friends with, just leave those two things out, and you're good. And I think what that did is it created something happening in all of our lives that was heavily steeped in politics, and it wasn't steeped in reality, because we couldn't have those conversations of like, well, I don't want to get into like the specifics because I'm going to ruin this, and I know people are very invested in this still, but it was, I think we can all agree there was information that was coming out being stamped by either the state or the media consensus that now we know is total malarkey, bullshit. We know it's totally like wasn't true. And data came out to change the story, and it was not like the damage wasn't done. And you had people that were fighting each other because they believed something that had no basis, and this other person believes something that had a basis. And it's honestly, everybody overnight became like armchair virologists and armchair, like we all knew like things that we don't know how we know them, but apparently you got to wear masks and you got to take shots and stuff, and it's like, we just got told all of this, and we all either spent a good deal of time getting to the bottom of something or not. But there were legitimate concerns, right, that we were going to basically have one of these apocalyptic events roll out, and this would be the end. And so I think that was mixed in there too. The fear level was really high, we were hearing stories about people, like healthy people catching this thing and being popped out, and and that
But the only
discussion.
thing, and the only thing that media did that have done in all those hard periods is dividing us even more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dividing us even more, making us hate each other. Like,
Yeah.
he's not vaccinated. You should. I'm vaccinated, by the way.
Yeah.
But the narrative back then, he's not vaccinated. You should not talk to him anymore. You should put it out of your friend circle. He's the devil. Like, come on. I mean, now if
Yeah.
I think about it, man, it's your decision.
Well, it's anybody's decision. My father, he's passed now. He passed before COVID, just before. I would have loved if he had stuck. I wish he was still around for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I wish he was still around is he was an MD. He had a
Mm.
lot of training, and he had multiple degrees that supported his MD. He was really just a bright guy, and I I I used to talk to him about medicine a lot, and about advances in medicine. And what's so funny is I have a distinct conversation in my mind that once he told me about this really horrible thing that happened in medicine, which is they released. He used to always say with medicines, he's like, give it 7 years. That was his big phrase. Like anything that's coming out pharmaceutically, he's like, give it 7 years before we know what the heck it does. And he had a story about here in the U.S. in the 70s, there was or maybe the 60s, there was something that was out there as a treatment, and I don't remember exactly what. It might have been birth control. It may have been something along those lines. But this thing that was out there in clinicals looked really good, and they said, cool, let's just sell that to everybody. And they started selling it to all these people, and a sizable percentage of people, they were women were getting pregnant, and then the fetus was non-viable. And when it was viable, the poor kids were coming out with undeveloped limbs, like alive but undeveloped limbs. And so it's called like flipper babies. It's a real thing. You could look it up. And that was used as a key argument for as to why we keep medicines in trial for 7 years, because that wasn't apparent in the first or second year of treatment. It took a while. There must have been some buildup that was taking place. So I've often wondered, like, if you were around, if he would have gotten vaccinated, because he probably would have seen it as it's, first of all, it's an untested mechanism of action, especially at scale. And they chose by and far to do it the worst way you could have done it. I talked to a guy who's one heck of a scientist. And I don't want to use his name, but he runs a company with his son that deals with the same sort of solution that is provided by these vaccines. So these vaccines, the RNA-based vaccines.
Yeah.
So just in a gist, they give you a jab, right? Like it's an ounce or two, whatever. It's a ton of fluid that's going in there, and in there are wrapped up RNAs, and those RNAs, they will eventually make it through a cell wall, and once they hit that ribosome thing we mentioned earlier, they're going to produce a protein, an antibody that's going to go out and fight the virus. So it's a really elegant way to do this, but they put a bunch of them in you all at once, right? And you've got, I think the old vaccine thing was like 2, or one of the companies had a single injection. And that is the dumbest way to do it with something you don't know what it's going to do. And you're assuming it's going to stay and release over time and all this. You're assuming a lot. So his company had this totally other way to address it, which was a lozenge, like a candy. You just stick it in your mouth. It's got all this stuff. It'll make it in through, I guess, the sublingually, it'll make it into the bloodstream. And you keep taking them until you don't have an infection or you don't have symptoms. And then you continue for another 10 days, then you drop them. And he was explaining this to me, and he's like, the cost for production on one of these is 12 cents. And I was like, shut up, 12 cents? And he's like, yeah, you'd probably need about 30. He proposed this to DOD, and they wouldn't give him the $25 million because they had already committed to get this into like production, to produce enough to like basically vaccinate the whole state or whatever, wherever he was. Like, like $25 million goes quite a long ways, because they had already been working these deals with the larger pharmaceutical companies that wanted, I think they charged the government $3K a dose. And
There is a big scandal at the moment in the European Union, because the European Commission didn't want to put available for the public the message exchange between the Ursula von der Leyen, which is the president of the European Commission, and the CEO of Pfizer. And now there is a Supreme Court of Europe which is judging this, and most probably they will get them published. And I think that's going to be a not so friendly moment for all the pharma industry. But
they're getting hit left, right, and center right now. Here in the States, President Trump just passed. Actually, I don't know about the legislature part of it, but what he's committing to will really, I don't know if it'll hurt the pharmaceutical bottom dollar, but it's no surprise. Like Bernie Sanders, another politician here, he talked about the pharmaceutical pricing problem, and
he's talking since years about it.
Yeah,
since years.
And so Trump, the story is fairly like out of his personal life. He's like, I know a guy, and this guy told me this thing, and it got me to look into it. And so I get, when you're powerful and elite and all that, I guess maybe you don't think about stuff. When you've got good insurance, when you've got all this stuff, like you don't maybe think about these things that are affecting people. But it seemed like there was massive discrepancies in pricing. Like they were using the Novo Nordisk product, Ozempic, as an example. These are Ozempic or Regeneron. It's one of these GLP ones that they're going to prescribe to everybody, And they were looking at it, and he's in London, and he has a friend, and the friend says, "Hey, I pay $80 for that, and when I'm back home in the States, it's like $1,800." So what they're doing now is they're doing a most favored nation pricing policy, which means that we as a nation, all the importers, everybody is going to agree that we only pay the cheapest price for something when it comes to pharmaceuticals, which means the cheapest price is going to go up. But that's what's about to happen. Like the pharmaceutical companies are, like they've had enough time. Like they have enough money in a sense, and maybe we shouldn't. I mean, geez, out of all the things in the world that you probably shouldn't tie to profit motivation, I'd say healthcare is one of them.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. And then we are surprised that someone is killing on the street the CEO of a health insurance company.
Yeah.
I don't say he did something wrong.
Freaking designed to maximize the amount of money they had. That became like a thing, right? In this country, we had a thing show up called HMOs, home medical offices, I think. But it was this system that evolved today. I mean, the United States healthcare system was not good for it. That wasn't a net positive. But what I was kind of doing was saying, like, you could pay in every month to this insurance program, and when you went to go see the doctor, it would be free or something, or it would be covered under your these managed monthly payments instead of going in to see the doctor, and it's like this big bill and you got to deal with it. Well, all that billing was private before that, so like you were negotiating with the doctor how much you're going to pay to get something done. You could do that, or you were negotiating with the hospital, and so the pricing became competitive. Doctors could compete on price, they could compete on quality, and hospitals could do the same thing. So the insurance companies sort of came in, and I don't know if it was legislated in here or what, but they exist mostly to do that negotiation for you with the doctor. But what it ends up being is the doctor gets restricted on the healthcare they can provide. So what a bad system that is. Like, you go into an office, and from your perspective, you're like, I'm here because something's wrong with me and I want to get to the bottom of it. And from your physician's perspective, they're thinking, okay, I get 15 minutes with them, so I can only bill for 15 minutes. The insurance, what is this person's insurance going to cover? Okay, I can do some lab work, but until the lab work gets back, I can't schedule diagnostic like a CT scan or an MRI, because that's the rules here unless I see something, and I can't do that. Um, I can give them medications in the meantime, but it's this process in which they've drawn out healthcare, the treatment of a problem, over several office visits to several different places, because it maximizes billing, it maximizes overhead, and the old thing, like, so my father lived through that, and he quit medicine at some point. Like, he used to have a practice and everything, and he was just like, I'm not doing it anymore because it's BS. But he practiced up until like his late 50s, I think, maybe early 60s, and then he was like, never again. Um, but the model used to be that, like, me or you would get sick, right? And maybe we've got some underlying health concerns, but like we would go to or the doctor more or less would come to see us usually back in the day. And they would, the treatment model was more like, you ever seen the show House MD with Dr. Gregory House? That's such a crazy show, but it shows like this way of treating where you go, this person's here until they're fixed, and that's how they used to treat it. And people
That's
would they'd get these things taken care of and fully diagnosed and set up on treatment plans, and doctors wouldn't see 15 patients a day, they'd see 2, and they would spend 4 hours with each one of them, because the point of the job is not to make money off the patient, it's to leave them satisfied, healthy.
So look, I will
Yeah.
tell you the European perspective there, because I've talked with a lot of persons coming from US and living in Europe lately, due to this podcast that I'm doing. And I have to say the opinion was always crazy. So the healthcare in the US, the difference between being a mid-range family or a medium income family and being broke is having a car accident. Because as soon as you have to pay for the medical bills, you are doomed. Which is correct. It's not happening in Europe, but this fast forward pace, it's happening at the moment. Because, so I'm talking about Germany. The concept is a bit different that you explain it. So you have everything which is in the medical system, the clinics, the hospitals, everything is private. But the insurance companies are also private, but they are controlled by the government. So you have a mandatory health insurance, but you can choose the provider for it. So you have about 300, 400 providers that give you different benefits for the same amount of money, because you have a legal, let's say, a legal fee that you are paying from your salary every month. So for the same amount of money, they give you different range of benefits. Some of them give you dental, some of them they don't give you dentals, and so on. So we can discuss about this a lot, but they are controlled by the government. and they have to be, so the hospitals are always giving the same invoices for the same thing, so they are having the same thing. But that this need of seeing more and more persons is there. The problem is that the government is saying, you, Craig, you're a doctor. You are allowed to work 8 hours a day. I'm paying you for 8 hours a day. What do you do besides 8 hours per day? You can do, but I will not pay it for you anymore. That makes it a problem, because if I call a specialist and I say, okay, I need an appointment, he's saying, yes, absolutely. I give you the appointment. We are now in May, in November.
Because mathematically, they can only, and medicine's a weird one where I think you can actually work quite longer hours in something like medicine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there is another thing which is called private insurance. So you have the mandatory one.
So you got if you got money.
No.
No.
It's so complicated, and that's why I'm saying
we have that here. Let me put a pin in that. I'll tell you. Remind me about what the system in America looks like if you have money. I'll tell you about.
I will.
Okay.
And there is something which is called health private insurance. So I'm trying to make the difference like this. Basically, what you do, that amount that you are legally required to pay, you don't pay it anymore. You get it cash in your salary, but you have to show the proof that you have a private insurance. What's this game with the private insurance? As you are young and you are alone, you are paying less for the private insurance that you'd pay for the mandatory government insurance. But it's getting more and more expensive by the time you get old and by the time you have kids. So just a mathematical example, if I would be, for example, I don't know the actual numbers, but just for the sake of an example, if I would pay the mandatory now 350 euros, because I'm young, I would now pay for my private maybe 200. But going inside, reaching 60, I will be able to most probably get to 800, 900 a month on my private insurance. Meanwhile, the health one stays by 350 for as long as I need it. But the benefit of the private insurance is that the government is saying, you know what? You can do the mandatory one 8 hours a day, but you can do the private one for the rest 16.
So they created the weirdest bureaucratic system that like if you've got a little bit more money, you can take advantage of.
And because the crazy thing is, once you switch to the private one, you cannot switch back anymore.
Oh, shut up. What?
Yes.
That seems really weird at the end of the day. Why wouldn't they let you? So you're stuck. If you at like 25 say, I'm going to do this private one because I can get my appointments quicker and like I can feel like a human being here. It's the first class of healthcare. Then by the time you're 70, you're like shelling out a house payment, whether or not you're sick. Like I think that's the biggest BS with insurance. It's like whether or not you're sick, you're paying for it.
Yeah. And you cannot switch back because you said, okay, but you took the benefit all your life for having cheaper or maybe for having better appointments. It would not be fair if you could jump out of it now and move to the national one because you.
Like at the end of the day, in my opinion, like, so we're doing everybody a favor by staying healthy. Everyone else being the entire economy, which relies on healthy people.
Yeah.
And we're being asked to foot that bill, and the governments that we have don't see that that's like a basic, probably tenet of a good healthy society is free healthcare, and nobody's should be stuck in these positions because that means the bandwidth is there to get anybody in whenever they want to come in, but they're like, nah, we're gonna create these artificial barriers, which is probably lining somebody's pocket somewhere along this. Follow the money. Why is that a law? Follow the money. Like who's making the money?
But and the for me the crazy thing is that you are somehow in this hamster wheel that you have to move, and nobody's talking because nobody has any interest in saying try to be healthier, try to make some sports. In Germany it's become now it's a thing, like they encourage you to make sports and stuff, but I don't think it's enough. Like nobody's
No.
talking about vitamin D. Germany, since I'm living there, I mean, I can tell you from November until March, you are in the depression because you don't see the sun. Like you see the sun
Yeah.
every
You
other
gotta
week.
take those. You need those 25,000 IU vitamin D things that make you see
Exactly,
spots if you take too many of them. That's what you need.
exactly. But nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about that
Well,
because there is no incentive behind that.
and the goal is right to create a human that is not a burden, right? Like
Mm.
on anybody else. That's the whole goal here. Is like if we can get well for healthcare, it's to basically say, are you strong and able bodied? Yeah, he's doing the money thing. Oh, before I forget, let me tell you about this crazy thing in the
Yes,
U.S.
you said
So,
sorry.
so the system here is, I don't even know what shape it's in anymore. There's insurance, and insurance can be subsidized by the government. They'll just simply put based on income. Um, so you go out and you shop a marketplace of various entrenched large companies like Aetna or Blue Cross Blue Shield. They're just big healthcare insurance companies. I don't know if they're global or not, but they're big companies, and they run all the risk matrixing, and then you tell them about yourself and they give you a quote. Depending on how much money you make, you can get some money back or get a discount from the government. Um, that's your option though, and these are various amounts of coverage and plans. Like an individual's plan could start out at $150 subsidized or free subsidized, but they could start pretty low monthly. And if you wanted like a top tier plan where you could almost know like I'm going to pay this much money a year and not a penny more, and I'll get good health care, because that can still happen here. You can go to see somebody here and you can get it with insurance and you can get a bill. That can happen. Yeah, just things won't be covered by your insurance, like emergency care, like emergency services. If you might have a cap as to how much the emergency stuff covers or something, or a condition that's not covered because although you need the treatment maybe is not approved or something. I don't know. But if you have money here, there's this thing called executive healthcare services. So you don't need to go fly to Dubai for this. You can go to someplace like in my town, there's a place called the Mayo Clinic, and they advertise it. I don't think they have a price listed on the website, but it's about $15,000, and you pay that, and you get to go to the clinic for a week. They put you up. There's like a hotel and all this stuff right on site, and they will run every single test on you. They will devise pre-treatment plans. They'll do the latest everything. They'll stick you in a CT scan, MRI. They'll do ultrasounds on every. You will go there if you went there not knowing what was wrong with you. By the end of the week, they'll tell you 30 things you didn't even know about that are wrong with you. And what bugs me is that's a capability, but it's a very expensive capability. Like there's not many people that can afford that. 15,000. That's a third of the average yearly salary, before taxes. And like, um, it's not like you're going to go there and come out and be Superman or something like that. It's not like you're going to, but maybe you'll figure out why
They
your
will
back
just
hurt.
tell you They will just tell you what's wrong with you.
Yeah. And then you still got to pay for the treatments after that. So it's like,
Exactly.
but at least you're getting it. Like I think the benefit there is that, you can at least, there are places set up where if you want to save your pennies and go do that, you at least won't get the runaround. Like you won't get this whole business of like you're going to get an x-ray today which is going to lead to a CT tomorrow, which might lead to even more imaging, which might lead to a biopsy or something. Like at least you're going to get a pretty good picture, because we go in now and we don't really get pictures of people. We just kind of like, we're all like probably walking around with some decent amount of broken stuff in us, and it's not like we're checking it every day. It's not like we're keeping tabs on it. And I think it's because it's prohibitively expensive. Now, we were talking about medicine changing with AI. This might be it. That might be the thing that changes all that, Because you want to hear something really weird? Like,
Do you think it will make it more affordable?
it'll open up some crazy opportunities, man. I think if you go on Amazon right now, you can buy yourself a centrifuge for not that much money, and you can buy yourself a microscope for not that much money. Certainly less than $15,000. Probably more in the range of 500. And if you knew how to draw blood, which is not that hard to teach yourself how to do, you could throw some blood into a centrifuge, spin it, get plasma separated, and put that under a scope, and you could run your own blood tests. And maybe not you, but an AI certainly could, and it could do that at zero
Mm-hmm.
labor cost. And I've seen some products coming out lately that are interesting. Like there's a product. I think it's Eli Lilly. It's a wearable continuous blood glucose monitor, and it lasts about a week, and
Oh, I've
you
seen
stick
it.
it
I
on.
heard about it.
You've heard
I've
about
heard
this,
about
yeah,
it.
and
Yeah.
it will transmit like blood sugar levels to a phone like 24/7 for I think a couple week or a week or two. And that's just like the first line of that stuff. There's another product out right now. There's a company that has a patent on something, and they do more advanced blood testing. I think they have 6 things they can look at, and I think it's into hormonal levels. And I'm like, whoa! So you're seeing stuff where you like put a thing on, and it's just going to give you vital statistics, and it's like, well, that'll go further, man. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, as Neuralink and other companies understand the nervous system more, they're going to be able to pull telemetry off the nervous system, like heartbeats. You don't need to have um, like a degree in anything to see that that's not hard to do. Like, you just need to be an engineer and kind of hack away at the signal until you figure out what it's doing. So we've got stuff that's coming up that's going to give like comprehensive health profiles that probably like not up to imaging, because there's not much you can do to get past like what you need to do what an MRI does. You need giant magnets, and you need complicated ways to push energy on them and all that. But I think all that stuff could lead us to like, I don't know, so like paradigm shifting stuff where we're getting like constant body telemetry, which is allowing us to get in front of issues before they even occur. And I think that's where we got to see it is preventative medicine is always cheap. So if you've got, somebody who's going to like break a leg because they've got early osteoporosis, like they've got bones are weakening, bones are becoming more like, instead of looking like complicated lattices that are very tight, they're looking more like sponges that are pushing a lot of volume where there's supposed to be material. So if you can get in front of that, if you knew like you're having osteoporosis show up, then you tell the patient take a bunch of chondrite and calcium and other things that we know can slow that down. If not slow it down, hold it at bay. But most people don't know they've got something bad until they go over the critical event, like they go over the edge of it, and something ruptures or whatever. The body just like has been giving signals for a while, but it's like, no, now is the day that you're going to have your stroke, or now is the day that you're going to have your heart attack, but which was completely preventable in a 20-year window. Um, but we just don't know that, because honestly, like it seems like we don't care. It seems like we all want to know that stuff, but we all know like, what are you going to do? Go beg your doctor to check you for everything every time you go in? They're not going to do that.
That's
They
the next
could.
problem. What can you tell him? That I have a pain here. I think I've asked ChatGPT, and you should check that and that, because he will just kick you out of the of his office and say, just go, just leave you alone. We have these powerful computers in our hand, like the watches, which gives us more information about health that we
Yeah.
have had 5 years ago,
Yeah,
and
and they're a
like
really good example of extrapolating signal, right? Because like I
absolutely
think in the watches they don't have. I saw one that claimed it could do blood pressure, and I'm like, I don't know how it's doing that. It's not a cuff, I don't think.
patterns. I think it's just
Yeah,
it's just only that just patterns,
yeah.
identifying patterns.
Doesn't the Apple Watch know? I don't want to just like say Apple did it, but I know one of them is looking at like early prediction of cardiac events. Like it can see, they
It's the
think
Apple
they can
Watch.
see
Yeah.
is the Apple Watch, and you're like, wow, that's so smart, because in those situations, I, the individual doesn't always realize what's happening.
Hmm.
And a lot of times with cardiac events, you'll get like this compounding problem of the person panics on once they realize it, and that it sets in hard, and like, and they might be at the point where they can't move. They might be at the point where like it just got to be too much. But a lot of times people will feel those symptoms. They'll onset for hours, and they'll be all the classic symptoms. Like they'll be like your jaw's hurting and your arms. It's not like it feels weird. Like and it's like it feels like somebody's holding your arm or something like that. Your body's telling you it's happening, but man, I've been living on this planet for 40 years. My body's done some weird stuff that I've gotten over that never turned into anything. You ever had a Charlie horse in the middle of the night? Like, geez, man, like stuff can happen where you're just so surprised by like the level of pain that you endure, and it's temporary, and the next day you're like everything's fine, right? So a lot of people have
The-
those things happen, and having something like the Apple Watch tell you, hey,
yeah.
we just we shot. I don't know if it does echocardiogram or what, but like whatever they're looking at, you go, whoa, that's a bad pattern. Get to the phone. Call. Do you want me to call
So
emergency services? It's like,
the
yeah,
crazy thing that I've heard from someone regarding that was that like you got the message in the last 20 minutes you are in a sitting position and your blood pressure your heartbeat is above 170. You
yeah,
should
you're
not
hypertachycardia.
panic.
Yeah,
Exactly. You should not panic, but you should try to call a doctor because you should check that out with a doctor because that's not good on long term.
you don't have a whole lot of time. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, you don't have days. Your life is now being measured in hours.
Yeah. I
And
don't know if do you know the Dropout documentary?
no, I'm not familiar with it.
Are you familiar with the case? So there was um, apparently a fraud case, or at least as far as I know, the trial is finished and it ended up being a fraud. It's an interesting one. It's a lady on the name of Elizabeth Holmes who founded a
Theranos.
company. Exactly. So you know it. The
Oh
doc.
yeah, introduce it though. It's Theranos with Elizabeth Holmes.
It's Theranos, the company, exactly. And they said they will be able to do 100, I think 170 tests, blood tests with a drop of blood.
On a
And they will
milliliter.
have it
Yeah, or 5
exactly.
milliliters. Yeah.
And they will have it in a machine, like you put the drop of blood inside that and you will spit the result out in like going. They market it like this that you go for shopping. When you enter the store, you give the sample of blood, and by the time you go out, you'll get the results.
Her husband's she's married now and in prison, right?
Yeah. And I think she
And her
has a
husband's not in
child.
prison. And her husband just launched a company to do this again. So they must yeah. But
No.
yes, true. It's happening. It's happening. Suckers are gonna get drawn in.
Oh
But
my God.
it's such a smart idea, right? Like it's such a smart idea. But I think the real problem that they had there was aiming for that you're just gonna have to give you 5 milliliters of blood thing. Like just get people comfortable with doing a draw. Like just get people comfortable filling
Yeah.
two, three
Yeah.
vials and like just get the. It's not as scary as you might think. To once you know what you're doing to draw blood, it's. I don't think I've ever had a draw on my own self, but a lot of people have these horrible experiences with they're called phlebotomists, right? People that draw blood.
hmm
But they have these horrible experiences because like if they're not paying attention, like they're just gonna go in sideways and they'll smack something they're not supposed to smack. But there's technologies now that make it so at home I would feel pretty comfortable.
I have
There's
a.
this beautiful imaging technology where you shoot I think it's a camera that sees your veins and then projects a picture of where the veins are onto
Mhm.
the arm. So
I
it's
think
like
I've
pretty,
seen it.
yeah. And all these heroin people, they figure it out, don't they?
That's a crazy example.
So,
You know,
but it's such a good idea she had there. It was so brilliant because she used to tell this story, right? That was, right now we get health telemetry. Your life is a movie, and our health telemetry isn't even like a trailer worth of that movie. And imagine if you could get every day, you could get everything that's going on with you across these 100 markers or 100, yeah. Um, uh, that wouldn't that be cool, right? And so I know that people don't think that. I know a lot of people looked at that, the bioengineering folks, and said you can't do this. But they
like several
also,
times.
yeah, but
Several
they've also
times.
said this about a lot of stuff. So it could be like just like I didn't think you could ever use galvanic responses in the skin to do what the Apple Watch is doing. It's doing it.
Yeah.
So
True.
we don't know. Maybe there's slight stuff that we don't understand that could be taken advantage of. But I just thought it was so funny knowing like that story was basically like they're taking blood in, right, and claiming they had one of these like 1 hour blood machines like in the back somewhere.
That's the
And what they were
problem.
doing was they're taking the
At the
blood and
end,
splitting it out, right? And then they were parceling it out to traditional machine. There was as a traditional lab.
And at the end, the BS was the problem, Greg, not the idea. The idea was an amazing
It was
one,
that
but
they were
the
trying to cover up
BS.
their bullshit.
Exactly. That's what. And there are two things here, maybe worth to mention. There is the documentary. I think in the US is running on Hulu, but it's also a podcast, really good documentary that I've listened to. I think it has 10 or 12 episodes with a complete case. It's really, really interesting.
So
So
you're pretty
forever.
through that. You think it was mostly because they were from my perspective, that is like a delusional narcissist. It's someone who's like operating in a
Exactly.
world of delusion.
Exactly.
She was she was being called. Well, I mean, who wouldn't, right? You're being told. Imagine being in your early 20s, being told you're the next Steve Jobs,
Yes.
and people
And
really
she got a
believed in
lot
her.
of money. She got a lot
Right.
of money.
And if you're Steve Jobs is a bit of a delusional narcissist in a sense. Like he a
Yeah.
lot of his but I mean to the point to not to crap on him, but just to say that he was so, despite looking at evidence, he was convinced what he was thinking up was right, and it ends up being right, like despite somebody telling him, you can't do this. He's like, I've made a career out of doing things people told me I couldn't do. So she's got the same.
Yeah.
That's her avatar. That's her mentor. That's the person she's going to go look at and say, they said that about this guy too, that everybody's comparing me to. So I think what I saw from the outside was this really weird thing of like, her personality felt invented, and her company seemed very poorly managed, and
There was
she was doing the
she
traditional like,
enjoyed life.
yeah, she
She enjoyed life.
enjoyed the
She,
money, and just was in this
yeah.
position of like, how much money can you pour on something until it works,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
oftentimes works. Like, it's like not a bad way to do it, but
Look
I
at
mean,
Elon with
I've worked.
SpaceX.
Well, yeah. I've worked in startups, and I've seen that, like, if like, it really depends. You've got to have a really good founding team. You've got to have people that are willing to like stick out late nights, see something that nobody else sees, believe in it, because if everybody else believed in it, it'd already be done, and you've got to really like, you've got to have all those components, but the one component you can't have is the crazy person who keeps changing the goalposts, and like the person who's going out there and lying about what you're working on. Because I imagine that killed it for all the people working there once they realized who their boss was.
Yeah.
And she's going out there making all these promises that keep shifting. And she's claiming she knows things that her lead scientist, your job as CEO there is not to invent the science, it's to hire the people that can do that and give you like one level of separation. So you've
And
got
get
these
them the
people who are,
money. And
yeah,
get
you
them
find
the
the people
money
that
to
believe they
do.
can do it. You don't tell people,
Yeah.
I believe I can do it. You do it. That's
Yeah.
madness. That's madness,
I do recommend the podcast. I do recommend the
Okay.
podcast. The podcast is
Just to be sad
fascinating.
about the world.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, Greg, you're a fascinating human being. Enjoyed the. I have no idea. I just realized it went about 2 hours since we started this, and we went
Not bad.
on a lot of rabbit holes. Um, what I what I forgot to say is that Greg is the co-founder of the Cosmos University, and I did a lot of research about that, and I had a lot of questions prepared for you, and I had everything, but I realized we went on this rabbit hole, and I'm trying to get a promise from you that we can do another one about the Cosmos University,
It's about
because
guys.
that was a
Yeah,
fascinating topic for
absolutely.
me.
Absolutely. I think I think this is a great show you've put together, and I'd love to come back and talk about, I guess, the Cosmos University and what we do there. Um,
Exactly.
I think like to not leave your audience super hanging. We're a research house. We're looking into we're a research collective and a publishing house. So we make books, but it's I think my research partner and I, we're trying to help path the future by looking at the past, and we're trying to bridge between science and spirituality. We could talk about this next time, but it's sort of like, I think we need to get back to holistic thinking, and back to um understanding that it we cannot have a rigidness, to life. We've got to see it for all the pieces, and we've got to bring empathy in, and we've got to we've got to explore things that have been left unexplored, because the question of could that be true or not was always being answered. It was not true. And we need to go and reevaluate a lot of stuff now to get to the bottom of it. So yeah, I would love to come back, Paul. Yeah.
I'm extremely happy about that. You said once that you wanted to build a new kind of mystery school, and I think that was really fascinating. And I have to say, I want to dig into that topic. I want to dig about in your annotated edition of the Book of Enoch. I want to dig a lot of topics that we didn't get to, but I enjoyed the conversation.
You too. But we'll set up another time talk, and it was great chatting with you.
It was great for me as well. See you next time. Thanks, Greg. Bye.